So I'm Andrew, and this is my wife Helene. We're the Prices, and we're in the market for a new sailboat with some certain qualities. And I started researching boats and found the foldable Telstar 28-foot trimaran by Performance Cruising, and so we started looking for one, and we found one out in Western New York, and went and took it for a sail and really enjoyed the way that it sailed. It's fast, it's light, and mainly it's very stable, and it has enough room inside for us to overnight for the weekends. Part of our requirements were that it's light enough and trailerable, and that it'll fit inside a normal marina slip. And this boat will do that. The outriggers fold in and under kind of the main hull, and the boat will fit inside of a 10-foot slip. When we got the boat, we knew pretty quickly that we would want to repaint it or paint it a nice color to make it look great. But you know, as we got into the project, we found, you know, we had to grind out all the spider cracks so that they wouldn't, you know, bleed air, and they wouldn't print themselves through any new paint or any other surface that we applied. But in order to paint it, we had to sand it, and as we sanded it, we found lots of little voids, lots of little spider cracks in the gel coat and stuff that needed to be taken care of. One of the things that you have to do when you want to paint the boat is you've got to remove the non-slip texture, the grippy texture that they put in. There's a pattern that they put in at the factory in the gel coat, and that's got to be removed because you can't paint into that texture. It's like a waffle pattern, and of course, you know, you'd never clean it out. So you actually grind it off with a grinder, which in this case I used a Makita variable speed polisher grinder. It's a Makita 9227C with variable speed and a soft start startup. And you know, when you're removing the non-skid so that you can, you know, paint and then reapply non-skid, you use like a 36 or a 40 or a 50 grit pad so you can remove the material quickly. And
did you use that? Did you use that on these?
Yes. Yeah. It makes quite a mess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it
used to have non-skid.
Yeah, those
on,
used to have non-skid on.
Now it's completely gone, free of non-skid.
So, yeah, all the hatches need some work. For the steering quadrant on the transom of the boat, and acts as a step off of kind of a swim platform. And it was in really bad shape when we got the boat cracked and broken and stuff like that. And so I'm just reinforcing it and smoothing it out, slowly trying to level it with some glass and epoxy.
Both outrigger hull joints have been ground smooth to accept fiberglass cloth to reinforce weaknesses, and the voids will be filled with thickened epoxy.
Yeah, just the voids inside the lamination.
Picking the right fiberglass cloth for the job is important.
There are going to be like 3 types. There's going to be fiberglass cloth that looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
This is a woven cloth. It's, once you lay this up, this actually comes in different weights or thicknesses. Once you lay this up, it'll be very strong, but that pattern will show through paint, so you have to sand it smooth and fill it. If you use a mat called top strand mat, right, which is CSM, this will lay smoother and won't show a pattern through the fiberglass. You'll have to sand this smooth still, but it won't show this pattern like the cloth will.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to get a smoother finish and have to do less filling and fairing in order to paint it.
Looks like it could go over rougher areas too.
Yeah, and so this is a biaxial cloth. It's actually kind of a fiberglass cloth sewn together with nylon thread to create a pretty durable cloth. and the strands run two different ways. There's strands sewn in this way and strands sewn in this way. And then on top, there is laid a chop strand mat type surface. So you put this down against the hull, right? This is the bottom, and you lay this on top. And as you glass this out, it forms, you get the advantage of the chop strand mat smoothness with the fiberglass cloth strength. So this is where, you know, they built in the structure for this crab claw, right? To fit in here.
Good joint.
And, you know, there's a void back here. Some filled epoxy, you know, some thickened epoxy in there, and then I'll fill it and fair it and smooth it out and sand it so that it's perfect. I'm making some epoxy filler to reinforce some of the voids in the fiberglass as I fill some of the deeper holes behind the fiberglass mat. This is biaxial cloth, and this is just a scrap piece, and I'm going to use some of this hair to create a thickened reinforced epoxy, and this will go behind the mat. When I lay the mat up, I don't want deep voids behind it. We, you know, got like 15 minutes here to make this happen. Of course, the deeper you make epoxy inside the mixing cup, the faster it'll kick. So you want to be careful about mixing big batches in deep cups. If you spread it out over a smaller area, see, that's a nice thickened epoxy now. What we're doing here is we're wetting out the glass underneath. It'll really raise the fibers in the fiberglass so that they bond really well with the new mat that we're going to lay down. Pressing this right in. And now I'm just going to impregnate the cloth with the fiberglass resin until it's all done. And so I'm just going to work my way across here and make sure that this center part really gets wetted out well, because that's where I want my strength to be. If my edges here don't get perfectly wetted out, I'm going to be grinding, you know, and doing some sanding in there anyways to get that, you know, smoothed out. So, you know, if I don't get perfect adhesion right to the very end, I'm not too worried.
Real challenge with the glass strands.
It is a little bit. Yeah, it is a little bit.
What's the advantage of the spatula, Andy?
It smooths rather than, you see how the spatula tends to push the fibers up into themselves rather than pull them away. The problem with the spatula is it's not as easy to get the material out of the container. So I just want to make sure I get a good even, you know, wetting here. Don't want it drippy and runny, but I want to make sure that all the cracks and crevices are filled.
After preparation, fiberglass has been laid down on the fore and aft walls.
One of the problems that occurs with gel coat is that you can get minute cracks in the gel coat. They are called spider cracks, and they're from overflexing, from dropping things, just from stress in the gel coat. And what happens is the cracks allow air and dirt and water into the surface of the gel coat. You cannot simply paint over those, or that air and dirt and other debris will end up underneath your paint. Additionally, as the boat flexes and stuff like that, those cracks will open up and they'll crack through the paint. Or the paint will simply go a little bit into the cracks, and the cracks will do what is called print through the paint, and you'll actually be able to see the cracks underneath the paint. So they have to be opened up, and you open them up with a small grinding tip or a cutting tip on a Dremel, and you open them up into a nice 16th or an 1/8 inch wide channel that then has to be filled with a filling material. This is a 2-part epoxy fairing compound. These are the Total Fair products by Total Boat that I purchased through Jamestown Distributors. They are exclusive to Jamestown Distributors, and this is a 2-part epoxy filler, which means it's a thickened paste. It comes as a filler that is one color and a hardener that is another color, and the blue and yellow, when mixed, make a green paste that you can see on the front of the boat there. That is a thickened epoxy that stays very nicely in place when you spread it on. It's very easy to sand off. The nice thing is that it's a different color than the boat, so you know when you've sanded it all off and you've just filled the crack that you wanted to fill. Removing the filling material with 120 grit sandpaper, which is the final grit prior to painting that all grip paint calls for. So as we sand off the fairing material, it leaves simply the covered or filled cracks. And that'll be ready to paint after we've sanded it and cleaned it. We'll make sure that it really is filled properly. Make sure that there are no dips or swales or anything like that in it. Non-skid was. We've reinforced this with Biaxial Cloth, and we will replace the non-skid on this after we paint it. This area here is very, very thin layup of fiberglass. Of course, they want the boat to be light and fast, which is not a problem, but it had actually delaminated here as the deck rolled over onto this reinforced area. You can see where it was delaminating. So I ground all this out, and you can see how thin it is. The deck on this boat was made really light, and you can see that it's really quite thin. And where it was mated to the main hull, which is quite, much thicker, there are some places where it is separated. So I'm going to go around and fill that with some adhesive sealant where it's separated, and then I'll clamp that shut and get it to hold. And if I have to, I'll put a couple screws through it to just hold it tight while it dries. And then the rub rail holder goes over this with screws, and then the rub rail clamps onto that holder. There's like a rub rail base.
3M 5200.
Yeah, 3M marine adhesive sealant. And it's permanent. So if I put that in there and clamp that down, that should seal that up for me. When we ground off the non-skid and we ground off some of the gel coat or opened up some of the cracks on the boat, we discovered some areas that really were not laid up very heavily. The boat is very light, very fast, but that doesn't make it very sturdy. So we actually wanted to strengthen the foredecks and the aft decks on these outriggers. And what we did is we laminated on some biaxial fiberglass cloth using West Systems epoxy. And so you can see here that this has been reinforced with fiberglass. You can still see the raw edge here that we haven't cleaned up. That'll be ground off and then faired in with the Total Boat, Total Fair products. And then the whole thing will be faired over to fill in any pinholes that occur in the surface as you're grinding it smooth, and any voids that have opened up, and then it'll be ready for painting. So this is All Fair LW, which is another marine filler. I'm using this to level these foredecks and to fill in the pinholes. When you spread the filler into the holes, you want to spread in two directions so that you drag it into the holes equally from both sides. Otherwise, sometimes you'll end up dragging the filler out of the holes. You also don't want to press too hard, but when you spread back in the other direction, you'll see that you can fill in the holes. So prior to painting, the surface of the hull is wiped clean first with acetone to help wipe off any residual chemicals, oils, dirt, grease, anything like that. And what we use are torn t-shirts that we can buy in bulk that are unused, they're new. And then once the boat is wiped down with acetone to clean it, we follow that up right before we go to paint it with tack cloths. And these are kind of a resin-filled cloth that you simply wipe over the boat to get any last-second dust or debris that might have fallen on the boat prior to painting. So when you first open your gallons or your quarts of all grip, right, whether it's epoxy primer, the finish primer, or the high build primer, or like I have down here, I have my top coat with the color in it. What you're going to find is that the paint will have separated from the solids. In this case, these sat a few weeks. We opened them up, and what we did then is we pulled out our paint mixer and we simply stuck this in and mixed up the solids and the chemicals together so that we had a nice homogeneous mix. So this is an Eastwood Concours high volume low pressure spray gun. Its basic configuration is with a 1 quart cup on top that can be removed, right? It's fan control, it's fluid control, it's air control, and a nozzle in the front. So the DeVilbiss D-Cup system allows you to prepare disposable cups of paint. When you're painting a large project, you don't want to have to stop and clean your primary cup over and over. Every time you clean the primary cup, you need to clean the gun because it'll be sitting there drying and getting clogged up. So the disposable system allows you to change the disposable cup quickly with a new cup, snap it back into place, and keep moving.